Hey, before we get into the episode, I've got a question for you. Do you like free plugins? Because if so, check this out. So I just released 2 brand new plugins under my plugin company, Carb Audio, and I want to make sure that you know about them because they were both built to solve the problem that I see happening all the time. And that is the need for long, overcomplicated signal chains just to get the sound right. The first plugin is called Busboy, and it was built for the mix bus and instrument buses, and it's designed to give you polish, glue, and control, but without having to build a big chain. It combines broad musical shelving EQ inspired by a $10,000 mastering EQ, along with classic bus compression and limiting that helps to glue a mix together and help you get punch. And here's the important part that you're going to want to know. Busboy is completely free right now until March 2nd, so definitely make sure to check it out. The second plugin is called Slapshot, and it's all about adding width and depth, but without the muddiness that usually comes along with reverbs and delays. And it is built around a slap delay approach that I've personally used on vocals for pretty much every mix that I've done over the last 15 years. But the beauty of this plugin is that all of the cleanup is handled behind the scenes, which makes it super easy for you to dial in a sound that sounds nice and clean. And for a limited time, Slapshot is going to have introductory pricing of only $9, so it's super affordable. So if you want to make clearer mixes with fewer plugins, you can grab them both right now at carbaudio.com. And again, Busboy is free until March 2nd, and Slapshot has super low introductory pricing. All right, that said, let's get into the episode. Hey, welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast. My name is Mike Navina, and thanks for hanging out today. Today, my guest is Ryan Ordway, and if you're not familiar with him, he is a multifaceted artist, songwriter, producer, engineer. He's had his music featured in television shows like The Office, Happy Endings, Raising Hope. He's had music in commercials and a whole bunch of other stuff. He's worked as an engineer for many years, operating his own studios and helping set up a bunch of other studios as well. So he comes into today's interview with a really interesting perspective on both being an engineer and a songwriter. And one of the main themes of this episode is the idea of being a songwriter working on music for sync placement. And like I mentioned, he's had a lot of success getting his songs in some pretty major television shows. So he offers some perspective in terms of how to get into that scene, how to prepare your tracks for writing, how to deal with things like songwriting splits, and how to make sure that all songwriters get treated fairly and compensated properly. He really brings a really interesting perspective in terms of breaking into that industry. And I know that I've had a lot of listeners who listen to this podcast reach out saying, their goal isn't necessarily to be the big rock star. They want to just write songs and do it from home and get their songs featured in television and shows and stuff like that. And that's exactly what this episode's all about. So I think if that's you, if that sounds like what you want to do, where you don't want to be on the road touring, you just want to be writing music, making it sound great, and getting paid for your art, this episode is going to be a really big help. So with that said, let's just jump right into it. Ryan Ordway, thank you so much for being on the Master Your Mix podcast. How's it going today, man?
Going great, man. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here to talk all things recording and songs with you.
Of course, man. For people who might not be familiar with who you are, what you do, and how you got into all of this stuff, can you give us that background?
Yeah, man, the short and skinny of it all is, I grew up in the woods of New Hampshire, pretty rural space. About, the nearest music store is probably 50 miles away. So, like most small towns in America, played sports and did a lot of outdoorsy things and camped a lot, but really fell in love with music when I was a young teenager, 14. So I started really, getting excited about it. And I've said this before on other podcasts, at that time, that was the time of VH1 and MTV. And, what inspired me to play music was seeing my uncle, Danny Wilde of the Rembrandts, on VH1 Countdown and just being like, wow, that is amazing. That's so cool. And that kind of really inspired me to actually think that, hey, this is doable, because there was no music industry in the small town of Wakefield, New Hampshire that I grew up in, besides a couple like local bands and stuff. But it was just seemed so alien to think about the music business in the world. And even so, that got me going, learned how to play around campfires. We used to hike up in the woods and camp for days. I'd bring my guitar and write stupid songs and silly songs about whatever around the fire. And, it was something that I felt really good about doing. And all through high school, I played and had a band in high school. And then after high school, moved down to Boston to, I planned on going to Berkeley at the time, but I ended up getting busy teaching guitar lessons and touring, so I never ended up going to Berkeley. But I was I signed up for 3 semesters. I think you had to spend back then like $250 to hold your spot per semester. And after 3 semesters, $750 of not going, I'm like, all right, I guess I'm not going right now. So then I just have been just a student of, it's probably a good thing I didn't go to Berkeley, because every time I sit down on an instrument to like really work on my chops and stuff like that, I learn something new and write a song. So very ADD in the sense of being a super choppy kind of player, and more song based and parts writing. So I think it was good I didn't go, but yeah, so ever since then, been writing songs and bar scene, college scene through the 2000s, did a few national tours and had, we were getting booked to play ski resorts, and did that all through my 20s. And then right around 30, I found out I had my daughter on the way. And at that time, I transitioned into, I built a small recording studio at that time in Wolfboro, New Hampshire, and started doing productions. And but all through my 20s, to kind of go back for a second, I made a lot of records. Like, I was in the studio a ton recording while touring around. The first 4 albums I made were all down on 2-inch tape. So we learned how to play in the room, and get through a take, with a click, without a click. And then Pro Tools kind of hit in, and everybody started getting their home, 002s and 003s. And so I recorded all through my young 20s, and all the complications and the frustrations of that, and learned a ton about, the challenges that you face trying to record in certain spaces. And then anyways, back to, 2010, started my first studio, and here we are now. It's 2026, and 16 years later, and in between then and now, I ran 4 commercial studios, 2 in New Hampshire, and then 2 in Portland, Maine. And now I'm freelancing. I'm in Southern New Hampshire, and that's kind of how I got into it. And along the way, through all those years, in 2009, I signed my first publishing deal after I made my first EP, and I ended up get my songs placed in a bunch of TV shows, from 2009, 10, 11, 12, like The Office, Raising Hope, all these like sitcom shows, Eureka. And that's kind of been my journey. And ever since then, I've been helping singer-songwriters get to the finish line with their music, and a bunch of stuff in between.
That's amazing, man. Yeah, you're definitely a multifaceted musician. And I'm curious to know, like, you talked about being the musician and being in the studio and working with a lot of other engineers, and then eventually taking it on yourself. Like, where did you learn how to do the engineering side? Was it just from being in the studio with other people, or did you ever get any sort of training on that side of things?
It's one of those things that as in my 20s when I was making records, I was always the dude looking over the engineer's shoulder or the producer's shoulder, and I was always had input on tone, and so I'd always be asking the questions, and I'm very much a visual learner, and so seeing how it's done, and then also making suggestions, and actually being in the room with people that were like, oh yeah, that's actually a cool idea, you know what I mean? This guy, Chris Magruder's got a studio up in South Berwick. That's where I cut my teeth learning how to record. Thank you, Chris, for putting up with 19-year-old me. But yeah, he was always very open and, to like whatever, and also would share. And if we said, hey, man, we're thinking about this tone, so I learned a lot looking over his shoulder, and then it just continued on.
That's awesome, man. So as a musician working, having people produce your music, and then now being in the publishing world where you're writing a lot of music, and on the engineering side of it as well, where you're helping other musicians through this process, like, what would you say were some of the biggest lessons that you learned from working with others that has maybe impacted the work that you do now?
What I would say, well, the most amazing 6 days of my life, I talk about this was actually about 10, 11 years ago. I was selected to go down to Nashville, and I spent 6 days down there at Blackbird Studio with Ken Scott, producer engineer Ken Scott. Mark Rubel was down there at the time. He's passed on, and Kevin Becca. It was an amazing 6 days all in total. It was supposed to be 3 or 4, and then they wanted to do a couple extras. So anyways, being in Studio D at Blackbird with John McBride, Mark Rubel, Kevin Becca, and Ken Scott, and the whole crew of people that was down there, the staff, it was unbelievable. It was a moment of, at that point in time, it's 2014, my head was filled with all kinds of audio stuff, like, because all the pensados places and all these YouTube channels of people saying do this or showing you things, and and so I felt like at that time I had so much information in my head. Sometimes that would get in my way. I'd go to work on something and I would second guess, or I just felt like, is this right? Because there's a gazillion different ways to do this. The biggest takeaway from working with Ken Scott was the matter-of-factness, what he didn't waste time on, what he did spend a lot of time on, and how he just made decisions, and the day just went so amazing, so confidently. And it's one of those things like where, for instance, he set up, we were sitting there talking with him, and he said, somebody in the room said, "Hey, Ken, I noticed like when you were working on, I don't know if it was Let It Be or one of the albums, he says, I noticed there was like a 67 over in the corner by the piano or the string section." And he goes, why'd you choose the 67? He goes, because it was plugged in. He wasn't like, oh, I'm going to think of a 67 because but he goes, I love the 67. He goes, a lot of times when they were making the records with the Beatles, or if it was David Bowie, he said, if the most important microphone you have is the one that's in the room. And he said, there was no time to waste doing mic shootouts. There was times he said maybe we would on, but he said for the most part, we came up with a concept, and once we heard the song, we knew what we were going to go for, and we just went, and there was no hitting the brakes in the process. So that really cleared up a lot for me. When I came back from Nashville, I was just like boom, 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 making decisions, not second guessing, committing all the time, and it just made me go from what everybody did when they first went from having tape to Pro Tools, not making a lot of decisions until the end. I think everybody's guilty of that at some point, where you just start stacking stuff in, you're not committing. And from that point on, 2014, my commitments, I just make commitments all the day, and I'll have safe microphones, but just the commitment level was just 1,000% more.
For sure. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting thing that you bring up there, of this idea of like learning kind of in small chunks via YouTube and seeing like all of these different tips from so many people, and how that can very easily become really overwhelming because you're learning so many different people's perspectives on things, but you're also not putting together the entire workflow and how it all really comes together. So to really be able to shadow an engineer and learn their complete system and what actually works for making something go from point A to Z, like I think that is huge. So yeah, it's something that I think a lot of people listening to this, it is easy to just fall into that YouTube trap of watching lots of random things. But I do recommend that everyone try to get the experience of shadowing someone, learning the full experience, learning that person's full workflow. And then when you do that, that just makes everything significantly easier, I think, to piece it together. And you can then sprinkle in other things to taste, right?
That's right. Yeah. And the other thing about that those sessions that was amazing is actually I was the artist. He was recording it was like it was the beginning of the Blackbird Academy. And so it was like a master class, but there was some people that I don't think were going to the academy, but just paid to come to the class. I believe that's what was going on. So, once, being behind the glass, first of all, and having them look at you through the glass, that was the most frightening thing I've ever done recording wise. But then I would come back in and I was always, we were always elbow to elbow with him on the console or whatever he was using for gear. But yeah, it's, we live in a world where there's just so much information, and there's, the one thing I could say to like any new engineers out there, if somebody says to you on YouTube, do this every time and it's going to be perfect, run in the opposite direction. It doesn't make sense. Art is so subjective. The way everybody hears so subjective. What's right? It's very, I get nervous. There's just so many, there's some amazing YouTube channels that are guys that are just been doing it through life. All I would say is just make sure you're following somebody that's actually doing this for a living, because there's just a lot of, and it's cool. I mean, I guess if somebody learns something and they teach it, it helps them get better at it too. So it's nothing wrong with that, but just, I get nervous when people say, do this every time.
If you're a fan of the Master Your Mix podcast, you might not even know yet that we actually have a full website packed with a ton of resources designed to help you make better mixes. So head on over to MasterYourMix.com, and on there you're going to find free downloads, cheat sheets, blog articles, books, courses, and a whole bunch more, all designed to help simplify your mixing process, give you more clarity, and help you finish more music without second guessing every move. And then if you're looking for more personalized one-on-one help where I can work directly with you on your tracks and walk you through the recording, editing, and mixing processes step by step, that's exactly what I work on inside of my coaching program, Amplitude. And you can learn more about that at masteryourmix.com/amplitude. And on that page, you can book a free call with me where we can talk through your current process, figure out where your gaps are, and identify the fastest ways to help you move forward with your tracks. And then if it makes sense to work together beyond that call, we can absolutely talk about that too. So once again, that's masteryourmix.com. And then for coaching, masteryourmix.com/amplitude. Yeah, for sure. I mean, as someone who coaches a lot of people, that's one of the first things I say too. It's like, there is no one way to do everything. And it's just really about learning that process of like when scenario or when you need to do option A versus option B, you know, and it could be just sometimes you're boosting an EQ, sometimes you're cutting an EQ, and same frequencies. It just depends on what you're working with. Like there's a lot of factors in that you just have to consider. So yeah, 100%. I agree with that for sure. So as a songwriter then, was the goal to kind of become like the rock star, or were you kind of seeing the future of your career being more along the lines of this like getting into publishing and all that kind of stuff?
You know, I think like everybody else, I was touring all through my 20s, and then I first started fronting my own music when I was close to 30, you know, but I was always the main songwriter through high school and into my 20s. So I loved being on the road through my 20s, but like once I found out I was having a daughter, you know, that kind of changes, you know, your perspective on being.
Makes it a little harder to tour.
Right. And like, it was just the circumstantial. I'm like, I'm not going to go be on the road. I had a couple really amazing opportunities that I had to pass down when I was younger, but I'm glad I didn't, you know, and my daughter now is, you know, 15, almost 16. And to kind of do a full circle on this. Yeah. I mean, everybody like, I've had a chance to play some cool stages through my 20s and I loved it, but you know, it just made sense to be in the studio creating and supporting the family. And, you know, a part of me, like I prefer the studio more so, you know, I think at this point in my life, you know, but I do want to get back. That being said, I do have a new music project called the Ordways, and I've got a whole catalog of music that we're re-releasing under that, you know, to get out there. And I don't know where we're going to go play, and, you know, but I'm kind of coming at it from a different perspective now, like where I've made my living, I've survived the industry, you know, making records for people. But to kind of answer your question about the rock star thing, like, I just want to find, you know, I'm kind of, with all this social media stuff going on in the world, which this is obviously like, I want to go back to, they say, if you want 1 million fans, shake 1 million hands. That kind of perspective, like, you know, I don't have any pressure on me at this point. I'm just writing music that I want to write. And, you know, I'm looking to play some shows. So we're starting to gear up for this year to start playing out again. And I hope that kind of answers your question. But yeah, you know, and I've kind of always been like, you know, move and groove, like where's life taking you? Like, you know, and, you know, I didn't even really know much about, the only thing I really knew about licensing or whatever is just, you know, seeing my uncle's songs on TV and then having my songs get picked up in 2009 and starting to get like some placements, like I said, you know, on all these sitcoms. And it was like typically like a bar scene and my music's like playing in the background or whatever. But it's been really exciting to do. And then since then I've done some, you know, I've worked on like, I had a Nature Valley commercial I did that was running for 3 years. I did a cover of Send Me On My Way by Rusted Root. And that was a really good campaign that I landed through my buddy Alex Fulton. And since then, working with him, we've worked on John Deere commercials and all these different commercials and these prompts where they say, hey, we want it to sound like Yellowstone. Can you do something like this? And then you get in the studio and then usually you get in the studio by like 9 a.m. and they want it by like 12 or 1 o'clock. So it's sort of like back to that old school, like you got to get it done by noon thing. So I thrive in that situation.
Awesome, man. Well, yeah, I mean, I'd love to dig into that a little bit, just like making that transition from being the touring musician to getting into the publishing side of things. Because I know that a lot of people listening to this, that is a scene that people want to get into. They want to learn more about how to not be the touring musician and actually just use their skills to write songs and maybe get licensing opportunities. So how did you get into the music publishing side to begin with?
You know, the first deal I signed, it's with a non-exclusive company. So, I mean, it's with a company that you have to know somebody to get in with kind of thing. I can't really remember exactly. I think what happened is my buddy Matt Rafal, who played on that EP. Great musicians living out of New York now and doing management stuff in the music business. He had a connection out in LA, and this is back, he sent in 20 CDs to this publishing company because he had been working on it a bit before for a few years before I started, it's before we actually recorded that EP. And they selected my EP I was the only EP out of 20 CDs that they took. And that was the first time that had happened. And also Matt also landed like an ESPN commercial or something. I have a song called Place to Run. So it kind of, that's how it happened. Matt's like, this would be great for that. And it went out, and like I said, it was selected, the only one selected out of 20 CDs at the time. And then that company started landing, I think it was like a Raising Hope, Eureka, and then The Office. And it was funny. It was like 2 a.m. here on the East Coast. And all of a sudden my phone's ringing and ringing and ringing and ringing. It was an LA number. And I'm like, what the heck? And it just kept ringing and ringing and ringing. And it was my agent out in Los Angeles, John, called me. He's like, dude, I dropped the ball. You're going to be on The Office tomorrow. You've got to sign this Schedule A. And this is Guilford, New Hampshire. And so of course I went downstairs, and the printer had no ink, and this is about early 2011, 12, maybe around there or something. I can't quite remember. But so then I had to go find a 24-hour store. Well, that was like 15, 16 miles away, and I go in and the guy's behind the counter. It's like 2:33 in the morning. I walk in, I said, do you guys get a printer? He goes, sorry, it's not for customers. So I throw down I think it was like $50 in cash. I said, dude, I need this signed now. This has to be in, because it was 2 a.m. and he had to have it done by like midnight. Long story short, we pulled it off, did it, took a photo, got it sent out. And actually I think it aired. I mean, this happened so long ago, I don't think it's a big deal, but like it aired that night. And so, but that was just really cool. Yeah, it was just a cool thing. I was like, holy smokes, I guess I'm on the Office. And then, it's just really, it's exciting when you put all the hard work into writing tunes, and then you turn on a show or something and it's playing, and it's sort of like that first time you hear yourself on the radio, Yeah.
So like in preparation for getting into licensing, like were you, obviously as an artist, you had lots of songs. So was that just kind of what you led with, and were like, with that CD that you gave your buddy, was it just like, here are my best songs, let's see what we can do with these?
Well, actually, that was the first time that EP was the first time I ever stepped foot into a studio being the singer. And it was recording at a studio in Boston called Q Division, which is they've just rebuilt in the last couple of years. It's an amazing studio in Boston. I had written these songs, and my buddy Matt Rafal, I was talking about, well, him and my buddy Dan had a band called the Bright Wings. So they were an existing band in Boston, and they were playing really cool venues around town, like the Paradise and all the cool rooms in town. And we ran into each other. I think I opened for them with my older, like I've opened for them a bunch and played with them. And I said, I got these songs I want to work on. Well, Dan and Matt and I got together, did some rehearsing, and I went in the studio with the Bright Wings as my backing band. And it was the first time I ever sang on a microphone in a big studio. And it all came together, and it just got a market at the time. It had this it still got this marketability to it. It's, I probably have picked up through the years listening to the Beatles, my uncle, and good hooks. And, and the one thing that was really important when we were doing that is that Matt and Dan, those guys had their songs on a bunch of shows before, from like the Kardashians and all kinds of those kind of shows. And they made sure that we had a TV mix, instrumental mix, a cappella, all that stuff. And, in preparation to answer your question, like if you're an artist trying to get your songs on TV, you got to have all those. So as you're making the record, you got to think about it. Like if they want an instrumental without your vocals, well, back in 2009, there wasn't much that could take a vocal out of a drum track like we can now, probably with, with RX or whatever. But so we had to think about that. So even though my vocals do bleed a little bit because a lot of it was cut live, but just those kind of things, like thinking about forward thinking, but also not getting in the way of the process and the vibe. So that was kind of my takeaway with them. And so anyways, we made that EP. It went out, and actually my uncle Danny mixed that album for me out in LA. And that was that was the one that got picked up. And so from there, I've been, recording a ton of music. I've got a couple hundred tracks right now that are just sitting on hard drives, and they've been out to TV and stuff, but I've never really put a push on my music as an artist, like trying to get out get out playing. So I'm looking forward to doing that now.
For sure. Well, I thought you just brought up a really interesting thing, which was the idea of the different mixes to make. And so can you just repeat, like, what are some of those requirements that you might see for the different types of mixes? And are you submitting those mixes in your initial submission to a potential opportunity? Or is that something like after they've heard the full vocal version that they might say, okay, strip it out, we like the song, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So what everybody should have, if you want to have your stuff first of all, it happens. TV things happen fast, and sometimes they happen and you didn't even know. Like I was telling you about The Office, but they happen fast. And so what you've got to have is an instrumental mix that's just with no vocals, and then it's good to have a cappella mix, which is vocals and harmonies. And sometimes you want a lead vocal and then just backing vocal mix, and that's pretty much it. Instrumental, full mix, obviously, and cappella mix. And you should have those in a folder, and then you should have your lyrics all written out, and then you have to have a thing called a Schedule A, and a Schedule A is a release form. So, and what you want to do, so back in the day, when I first started doing this, like it'd be like a couple of us, like typically I've always written with just one or two other people with me, and maybe a couple more, but now you could have 10 to 12 writers on pop records and stuff. So what's important for those kind of situations is you form yourself a publishing company, because what these TV shows don't want to deal with is 12 Schedule A's for one song. So that's kind of the tip, is like you don't want to show up because they don't want to do all that paperwork. So my advice is, if you got a writing team, they typically they want to have less writers. So you could start a little publishing company, have all your music go through, whatever you want to call it, have one Schedule A. And at the time of song conception, my buddy Charlie down in Nashville is telling me he's going to songwriting sessions now, and he's bringing a Schedule A with him, and they're all signing it at that session. So if something were to happen, there's no roadblocks, and yeah. And I think that's important because, like, when you're first making a track with everybody's on the same page. Well, what happens in 5 months when people are 5 years down the road, and all of a sudden the Super Bowl wants your song? Everyone's going to remember that moment a little differently. And especially if they're like people you're writing with and and you haven't written with them since, it's just a good way to cover your butt and be ready to go if an opportunity comes around.
That's great advice. I love that, because I do think that a lot of people don't even think about the contract or the songwriting splits and all that stuff until it's too late. And then, yeah, it can cause a lot of problems. And, just based on what you've said here, like, speed seems to be a very important thing. So, this extra little bit of prep work early on is just going to allow you to have those opportunities, because you're not going to be like stuck chasing contracts and stuff like that. So yeah, great advice there, man. Yeah. So then as far as like setting up those Schedule A's and the songwriting splits and stuff, do you recommend that like people get that covered before you even start writing? Like, is it generally going to be like a thing where everyone's kind of taking an even percentage, or do you like to wait until the end and be like, okay, this person contributed way more, they get a bigger cut? Or, what advice do you recommend there?
Well, like I was referring to my buddy Charlie, like those guys are doing it daily, or, because he's going, there's so many more writes you can do in Nashville. Like you can set up 4 or 5, 10 writes a week. So to answer your question, I try not to spoil the energy of the song. Sometimes if you roll into a writing session and you've got so much business in the front, you can actually wreck the energy of something magical happening. So I'm still finding that it's a dance, you know what I mean? But I think that you should have some agreement or just understanding when you go into with somebody to write. And if they're not used to writing, sometimes it's just easier to say, hey man, is a word for a third, or, that you hear about that, being a saying, a word for a third. Or if somebody comes to me and they've got a verse and a chorus, and they're missing, they don't have a bridge, or they don't have the hook, and I write that, it's all kind of like, it's like a dance you're doing. But there, but if you get, you're with 4 of your buddies and everybody shows up, with coffee in hand, ready to write, 4-way split, I'd rather have a part of something that's successful than getting greedy. Now, the things that could change that is like, say it's you and 3 of your buddies, so there's 4 of you. You're shelling out $1,000 a day for a recording studio. Well, you got to take that in consideration, and they should too as well. So there might be situations where, like, hey, if I'm covering the upfront, to make this project happen, then those are conversations you should have, whether it's a recoup or it's a, percentages a little bit more because you're taking the risk or you're spending your money. So those are things to think about too.
Yeah, those are all really great points to bring up. And yeah, I think that, it's the songwriting thing it's such a delicate dance of all of that stuff, and you don't want to hurt people's feelings, you don't want to offend people, but you also need to be fair about it too. So, but I've always found for myself, like, I love the sessions or the bands that I've been in where it's like everyone's just taking an even split, because then it's like we all have a responsibility, we all have to push equally as hard for this thing, and not just put all the pressure on one person. So I mean, those are ideal situations, I think, but it doesn't always work that way for sure.
Yeah, I love those sessions. I like when everyone's excited, everyone's high-fiving and just like so psyched about this moment. It's magic. It's magic. You walk into a room with an instrument or a couple instruments and you write something, and it's still magic to me. I still get the same adrenaline rush, and just this euphoric high that you get when you've created something and you listen back and you're like, wow, it just doesn't get old, and especially when you're surrounding yourself with inspiring, positive, creative people,
For sure. So now that you've been in the publishing world for a while and you've got publishers that you work with, like, what does that typical process look like as far as like them giving you like a pitch for, or like saying that they need some music for something? Like, what does that typically involve, or what does that process look like there?
Yeah, so often, like, you'll just send in your original tunes to get them into the catalog, and that's one way. And then there's times where they there was some years ago we got pitched to do a recreation of "Pennies from Heaven," which is like I think it's Sinatra. It goes way back to, I think, Bing Crosby and all them did it, and they wanted like a Weezer kind of vibe, "Pennies from Heaven." And that was fun. So I got the crew together, and typically, with those, there's like upfront demo money. So you get paid for your day, and it's usually whatever, what it ranges, but it's like, it's like going to do a gig. And so those are really fun things when you're pitched and they give you a pretty scope of like what they're looking for. That's a scenario. Those are always fun because you're getting paid on the front end, but then there's just the ones where you send in your songs and they chop them up and they'll stick them in a show or whatever. Those are really the two. I don't know much other ones besides, unless they want you to write a song for it. Like, that's the other one too, is write an original song they're like, hey, we like the sound of Tom Petty, Wildflowers. Can you like write something like that kind of vibe, but don't rip it off?
Like kind of thing.
Yeah, like the sound alike things. Yeah, and those are another things to do. But I'll tell you a moment that was really cool when I did the Nature Valley commercial. There was "Send Me on My Way" by Rusted Root. Are you familiar with that song?
I feel like if I heard it, I would know it, but
yeah,
it's not ringing a bell off end.
Yeah, you've heard it. It's got like a guitar part that's like, I could show you a bit. But anyways, what was cool about that song was recorded in '92, I believe, and there was no click track. It goes ba-dum bum bum ba bum ba-dum bum 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 ba-da, and it was me, and there was 15 other writers around the country, and these are like players that are playing stadiums and with big artists. So it was quite an all-star crew of writers that were involved, and everybody else used a click track. I didn't use a click track. I took the section that Nature Valley liked, and I played to their track. And so the click tracks, it sped up and pulled, and I believe that's one of the reasons why I landed. Because if you go like ba-da, ba, 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 it doesn't work. So it's like ba-da, ba, 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 ba-da, ba, just pushing and pulling, which creates this energy. When you straighten it out with a click track, it loses that little tug. I believe that's the reason why I landed that, and everybody else put it to a click. So, and then also I had this really cool tenor acoustic guitar part that I put on there at first. Which was cool about this placement is that the band Rusted Root, they had to sign off on it. So they were listening to it in real time as I was sending it. So I thought that was really cool.
That's very cool.
Yeah. So they were like, this is cool. We like it. But yeah, I think that's like it was because of not using the click track that I think I got it. And also probably some of the other little things I did, but all the submissions that were in were like killer. It just didn't have that thing.
That's interesting. Yeah. It really drives home that idea of like making something that stands out, but also something that, just feels right. Cause I think a lot of times, especially these days, it's so easy to get fixated on making everything super tight to the grid, or like hyper editing things or whatever, but sometimes just like the feel is more important. And I guess for a commercial, people are going to want to react to that music, so just goes to show you like the importance of feel in a track.
Yeah. I mean, it's so important. Feel is, in my book, is everything. But also, it's just like anything else, it's forward thinking. Like, is it a song that you're going to try and put some program loops to, or where are you going with it? Is it a song that just needs to be organically recorded and feel like it just kind of happened, or does it need more production on the other side? And I think making those decisions and understanding that early on as a new artist or a producer will help you from not working yourself into a corner. Which, say you're recording an artist and they're like, "Hey man, I got this cool arpeggiating loop I want to put in there." I'm like, "Well, you didn't play, it's not played to a click track or in time," then you've kind of, and I've run into that, it was earlier on in my producing career, but and then we tried making the loop fit to that, and it felt like a flat tire the whole time.
Sure.
Yeah.
So having now written like over 1,000 songs and having success with placement, do you feel like you found any kind of trends in terms of like what music supervisors are gravitating towards from a songwriter perspective?
That's the one thing. I've been so busy just working on projects on my own, and I'm just writing what I'm writing and recording what I'm recording. And typically, I'm pretty far out I'm not really in on the trends as much. I mean, obviously, like I say that, but when I was, I ran the studio up in Portland, Maine for almost 5 years, what I was. And I worked with a lot of singer-songwriter female artists, and, everybody wanted the Phoebe bridges and the rubber bridge guitar kind of stuff. And so that's those kind of trends, or the production of like the Lana Del Rey swimming reverbs and how to make those happen. So I guess in that sense, yes. But basically a lot of what I was picking up on is when artists would come to me and be like, "Hey, check out this artist. I want to do something in this ballpark." So, but it was usually other people sending me the things to, so you get so busy, you don't have time to, it's like listening to music outside of, especially when you're like super busy. It's hard sometimes to discover new music when you've got your headphones and speakers all day.
Sure. So then as a songwriter, are there certain guidelines that you try to stick to as far as like how busy a song is, like either melodically or instrumentally or something like that can maybe increase your chances of having a song picked up?
Yeah, as I go on and as I move on through my career and time here, I'm always coming back to less is more. Just try and make the sounds that you're putting on a record more impactful versus like, instead of 4 guitar parts, can you get a tone that fits with 1 guitar part? And then in the mix, you might do a little, put it over here and do a little bit of sprinkling of a delay on the right. And now you've just got 1 guitar part. And yeah, if I say there's one common thing I've come to learn, and it's also like what genre you're in too as well. Obviously, if it's like metal, that's a lot different. And I've done a bunch of that too. But less is more. Try and make the sounds you're making more impactful and just fit in this thing. And understanding like what you're going for sonically in terms of like how big's the low end. Does this got sub going on? And if you want to have a bigger low end, then you can't. You got to let that sub bass or whatever be the focus and then sprinkle on top. So yeah, I don't know. I hope that answers that question, but yeah, I think less for me, but then there's times I love, throwing everything at it, but I try not to do that as much anymore because it's like it just creates a lot more work for you in the end.
Yeah. I think that like a lot of people tend to, when they're writing, and this is something I see as a producer all the time too, is like, often work with artists that are just kind of throwing everything inside of their mixes and like layering just because they can, or they think it sounds bigger because they have all these extra things. But often just when you strip things out, it really can show the true nature of the song and give you that like that energy and the feel that it really needs without all the clutter. So I think it is important for people to just keep it simple and don't overcomplicate it.
Yeah, and the same thing with your songs. Like just you just write a melody that people are going to enjoy and remember, and also lyrically too, like I've never been, I've always written simple lyrics, and sometimes a little out there too, like a little, psychedelic rock kind of lyrics and vague in ways, which can be good. Also can be, we're in a time right now where it's lyrics. I mean, lyrics have always been really important. It's like, is it lyrics or is it the melody? And I've kind of always been melody and lyrics too, but it's like, these are things to think about if you're trying to get your songs on in a moment in time on a TV show, or if there's like just understanding those things. And they're both great. Like I could sit around and listen to My Morning Jacket or listen to a lyricsmith of some sort, singer-songwriter thing, But I think, when you're making these kind of productions, you should have an idea where you're going. And with that said, how many times have you said, oh, this song, you predicted like what the song was going to sound like, and it never comes out sounding like that. It turns into something else. And that's a big important thing, is let a song lead you. The song's going to take you where it wants to go. And so, and don't be afraid, and don't get too, don't get too much demoitis or like preconceived notion. And that typically happens when you have other humans in the room with you, that it'll typically go in another direction. And sometimes that's great, but sometimes you can, sometimes it's not. So it's all like this. It's like when you're making records, you have all these things coming at you, all these decisions, like microphones, arrangement stuff. I say I guess, not to get too rambly, is like just being open and trying to just kind of keep the flow going and just understanding all these things. It's a lot too,
For sure. But again, that's where like the simplicity thing is really important. And just like, if you keep it simple, you don't get overwhelmed by any of the process. And just going back to like the simplicity in the songwriting too, another thing for people to factor in is that like, if you're going to have your songs licensed in a commercial or a movie or whatever, there's also needs to be room in the track for dialogue to breathe and stuff like that. That's going to go around what you're doing in the song too. So yeah, I guess just another reason for keeping things simple.
Yeah. Simple always wins. It always wins.
For sure. Yeah. So I can already imagine, like, there's people listening to this that are thinking to themselves, like, I've got hundreds of songs already ready to go. Maybe some people don't even have that many, but they still want to get into the sync world. Obviously, the industry has changed quite a bit since you first got started with this, but what do you recommend these days for people to get into the sync world, and how can people find like the music publishers or the music supervisors that would be responsible for getting some of these placements?
Well, I think you're right. The industry has changed a lot. There's companies out there that say, and I don't know anything about these companies. There's certain companies that like you become a membership to, and I don't know what happens with those. But aside from that, I would say, first of all, work on your craft, make your songs sound, get them sounding the best they can, and make sure you deliver them in the right manner and have them ready to go. And then I would say, work on getting in the room with people that are making films and stuff. So go to film festivals, find a way to be in the room. At the end of the day, it's like every one of us we get bombarded every day with emails. We get bombarded with social media. We're getting bombarded. There's no better way to make connections than being in the room, shaking hands. And I feel like that's the way so I would say, go to film festivals, go to indie film festivals, meet up and coming film students at film schools and say, hey, I would like a shot at helping you, do your soundtrack or doing this. Aside from that, I think that's the way to do it, because I think, the saying, a lot of deals are made on the golf course. I think that kind of translates through all industries, and be a person that people want to be around, like, and just make sure you do this in a way where you're not off-putting or being too forward. A big part of making records, and a big part like why all our favorite engineers got their gig, is because they were in the room, and they were in the room, and people wanted them in the room, and they just knew how to make the process move forward. Because like we were saying, with all these decisions we have to make, if you're somebody in the room and you're an assistant engineer or whatever, or a member in the band, and something's going wrong and you can go get a piece of gear or something to help it out without even being asked, those are the things that are going to excel you as a songwriter and a producer. I mean, nowadays, like, you kind of got to be the jack of all trades in some sort fashion. You got to have all that. You don't have to do everything great, but you got to just know, right, a little bit of everything to be able to turn this stuff around quickly.
For sure. Well, you said a quote earlier that I loved, which was that idea of like, if you want 1,000 fans, you need to shake 1,000 hands. And what I love about that is that it really makes you think that like you have to be active with this. It's not just a matter of making the art and hoping that people find you. It's like you actually have to get out there and yeah, make people aware of who you are and build those connections. And I think that the same thing holds true to what you just said about like going to those film festivals, getting in the room with people and just introducing yourself, making yourself known. Like just being in the room alone is not going to help you, but getting to know the people, trying to meet people and all that, like being actively trying to push your career further, that's going to help you get the results that you're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had a buddy who just went to a film festival. I think it was the main film festival up by Camden or whatever, but he went there and he was telling me about this. He's like, because he used to live in New York City, and like a lot of people he's from Maine, but then he was in New York for 10 years and then pandemic hit and back to Maine he went. But point is he ended up going to the film festival and not going there to push any agenda, but just to be there to support the filmmakers and watch the things. And he ended up at an after party hanging out, your typical just kind of late night thing, hanging out. Next thing you know, he hit it off with a filmmaker producer there from just hanging out. The guy's like, "You're cool. So tell me more about like being actually interested in what he was doing." The filmmaker, my buddy was. And then the guy's like, "You're so much fun to hang out with. What do you do? Like, remind me what you're doing." And he told him about what he did. And the next thing you know, he got like 4 gigs for song placements in this guy's films and whatever he's working on. So yeah, being in the room and just knowing how to be in the room it's important.
Yeah,
and
how to be a good hang.
Yeah, got to be a good hang and be prepared. So when it comes time to show what you can do, have your stuff ready and just be organized. And I'm still working on all that, and also like, I'm no longer running a commercial studio right now. I'm freelance. And so, this last year, there's some transitions in my life. I moved back to New Hampshire. My girlfriend and I are launching our new band, the Ordways, but it's too easy to like not be out doing stuff. And so we're actively, getting back into the community, support your local community of musicians and filmmakers. And we got plans to be doing a lot of work down in Nashville between here and there. And then there's a local studio here that's amazing, 16 miles from our house, called Studio Metronome. And it's a beautiful room over there that, we're going to start doing some audio classes and recording. I'm working on some music over there. And I guess like, as you see where I'm sitting right now, we're working on a bunch of the music right here in this living room. I went from having a studio with a API console to PMC monitors, beautiful PMC speakers at my last studio in Portland, to now, I'm working in Luna when I'm at home because I love the API emulation and all that stuff. And I got some Slate headphones here that I'm using, and I'm doing mixes here, and they're working, and it's translating. And all the years of experience of working on in rooms that sound good to rooms that didn't sound good to this lifelong journey, I'm actually able to do mixes in these headphones. And if you would have asked me that 3 years ago, I would have said I could never do it, but I'm doing it. And they translate and, from $40,000 monitors to $300 headphones, but it's all the years of doing it,
Man, I love that. I think that just really sheds light on like how possible this is and how you don't need to have all of that top-notch gear. It's just really like you can keep things simple and still see results. And yeah, I'm sure like when you strike those big opportunities, if they require you to go to a fancy studio or whatever, then you can do that. But most people are just doing this at home and getting their foot in the door that way. So right. Yeah, I love that, man.
Sometimes the difference is knowing when to farm it out to something else. Like for instance, like just because you can do it at home, everything at home, the question is sales. So say you first of all, it starts with a song, right? That's the most important part. A great song will sound good on your iPhone in terms of just like getting people to hear the song. But then we talk about this production stuff, like, and where the production's going. A lot can be done at home, but knowing when you need to reach out to somebody else, maybe it's a mastering engineer, maybe it's a mix engineer, maybe it's a drummer that is going to play the perfect part for this song that you've written. So just knowing when to say, I need help. And that's what's going to make you stand out when you go to these film festivals. If your record or your thing sounds amazing, whether it's lo-fi, hi-fi, or if it's just complete lo-fi, those are all moods, and those are things to keep an eye on. And anyway, that's kind of my soapboxy thing.
For sure, yeah. You definitely have to be willing to build a team around whatever's going to make it sound best. And if as a songwriter, it's like if you're if you're writing songs to pitch for, let's say you're a guy writing songs for female singers, and you're probably going to want a female voice on the track to make it sound closer to where you want it to go, right? Like, as opposed to trying to do it all yourself. So like, find the right person who's going to be the right fit for the song, and, you know, just tailor the songs as best as they can for the opportunity you're trying to create, I guess, right?
Absolutely. It's up. And the thing you said, that's true. It's about the team. It's like, have a team of people, you know, whether you can just email them or send them a voice memo that can just get your back. And, you know, because the one thing about artists is we all go through moments of just self-doubt. And it doesn't matter if you're on the biggest stage in the world, or you're, you know, just learning how to record in your, you know, 10x4 room or whatever, wherever you are. You know, it's just the self-doubt thing always seeps in. And I think it's just important to have somebody around you to help keep it in check and be like, listen, you know, great things happen when you got the right team.
So how important do you think it is for anyone who's looking to get into publishing to also understand the engineering side of things?
I think there's a certain I think to be a modern songwriter in 2026, unless you've just got the resources to spend a lot of time in a commercial or a big studio. Well, first of all, like, let's talk about that. Let's if I had endless resources, I would be camped out in a pro studio all the time, you know? And I think anybody that has, you know, wealth or whatever, especially when you're trying to learn, because there's like learning like what it should sound like. We've all been through, I mean, how many rooms have we been in that you're always fighting the sound and your speakers are lying to you. And it's sort of like mixing color. Like, I really am a firm believer, once you understand like some speakers or a room that's not lying to you, and maybe now it's these these headphones, you know, like I would say you're probably better off to train in these headphones than you are a pair of speakers in a room that's just it's got reflections all over the place. So I think it's important to, like, you know, if you're a singer, know how to record a vocal at home. Get an SM7, get a little, interface, and just learn how to, you know, work on your craft. And I think that's the most important part. If you're a multi-instrumentalist, then learn how to record all those parts and at least demo them out, you know, because there's a lot of great things I'm working on nowadays with clients that the demo becomes the record. Like, I may program drums in Easy Drummer, and then we head down to the studio and cut the drums in a big studio. And that's those. So I think it's good to understand it a bit, but it's also like the other side of that is like somebody that has just a little bit of knowledge can be more deadly. They can get in the way, and just learn how to do it. Stay humble, stay open, and I think it's just going to help you build your craft and be be more efficient.
For sure. And I'd imagine too, like you had mentioned, that speed was a really big part of the process, and how sometimes there's these tight turnarounds. Well, being able to do it yourself is going to give you that ability to do it, as opposed to like having to reach out to all the studios and see who's free and who can take you right now, you know?
That's right. Yeah. And like Ken Scott said, he said the most important microphone is the one that's set up and plugged in, you know, at the time, especially when you get creating. I've been paralyzed by options a lot, and I've had times in my life, and unfortunately it's been a while since I've, you know, if the beautiful $10,000 microphone has got a weird buzz going on, then fine, we're going to jump back on the SM7, you know, or whatever the next in line might fit the bill, you know.
For sure. And then also, to go back to your other point too, it's like, well, I guess if you don't know the engineering side of things, build the team where you have an engineer in your pocket to be able to reach out to when you need something quick.
And that's really important. And it's really important knowing, like, if you're just like, I have no interest in learning how to engineer, like you said, just, you know, there's the beauty right now is the entry point is the bar is so low. You can get into recording and have really good recording gear for not a lot of money. So there's a lot of people out there doing it. So just align yourself. It's all about that team, whatever's going to keep the creative process going.
Love it, man. Dude, I think that this is probably a great spot to wrap up. But one last question for you would be, at the end of the day, like, what do you think ultimately makes a great song?
Well, you know, I mean, a great song, regardless of how it's recorded, is something that when you feel the hair on the back of your neck stand up, or you get emotional, and it just makes you feel this human connection. And I think that's really it, regardless of the genre or whatever it is, when it makes you remember a moment in time, or it just, you know, you think of loved ones, or all those little elements. I think that's what makes a great song. you just feel it. It's a feel thing. And and something you can remember, but it's really about, it's just really about how I think it makes you feel. And I think everybody's, it, you're driving down the road and a great song comes on the radio, or you're working with an artist and they sing something and you're like in the control room, getting teared up or just feeling this emotion, and I think that's, it's a weird thing, but when it happens, you're like, whoa, wow, there's something here. And it's about connection. Great songs create connection.
Yeah, I think, with this bigger picture thing that we're talking about here with licensing, connection is a really big part of it. You have to make the audience feel connected to the scene or to the product or whatever it is that is in that's being featured. So yeah, definitely like the connection thing is huge. So man, this has been awesome. I've loved learning more about your process, and I really appreciate you taking the time to hop on here today. If people want to learn more about you, maybe even work with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
You can reach me at theordways.com is our new website, and also ryanordway.com. I'll be having that point to my website soon too. But yeah, go to theordways.com, reach out to me regardless of where you're at. I work remotely with people, and I'd love to hear from you. And also just, so I see you're a drummer over there, huh?
Yep.
Nice. So do you do a lot of remote session work for people?
I would love to do way more. I've done a little bit of it here and there. I love playing, so like, yeah, man, I got to get back into playing more. I've been so much more focused on the engineering side of things, but yeah, the musician inside of me is like, oh man, I got to get back into doing more session work. I love doing it.
Yeah, it's great. It's great, man. Thank you so much for having me, man. It's been great. And if you're ever down in the States or whatever, we should connect.
So that was my episode with Ryan Ordway, and I really enjoyed learning more about getting into the sync world and how he's approached it as a songwriter, and how he's just focused on making songs and making the act of writing such a regular part of what he does so that he's prepared for opportunities as they come. And he's got this backlog of music that he can pitch when the right opportunity comes up. I thought it was interesting to learn more about his approach to writing music and thinking about how the songs he's working on could work in a sync placement as well. And so, yeah, definitely really important stuff to know if this is the field that you want to get into. And I also really appreciated that quote that he shared of, if you want to make 1,000 fans, you have to shake 1,000 hands. I think that quote really encapsulates kind of where people go wrong and also how to do it right. I think a lot of people just focus on making art and making songs, but they don't spend the time learning to market themselves. They don't push themselves out there enough. They don't get in the room with people, as Ryan talked about here, and you're not going to get very far if that's how you're approaching songwriting. If you want this, like, if you build it, they will come kind of thing, it's not going to happen. So this idea of getting out there, shaking hands, being in the room with people, is so key. And I think that, with all the advice that Ryan shared here, it gives us a great idea of where to start looking, getting in the room for film festivals, getting in the venues and meeting other artists. There's a lot of different ways that you can meet people in this industry, go to conferences, that kind of stuff. So yeah, if you want to have success with this, it's about being prepared, aka having songs, but also pushing yourself out there, making yourself known. And when you can make the connections between your music and knowing the right people, that's when good things are going to happen. So yeah, I just thought it was really helpful to hear Ryan share his journey in this and some of his advice in terms of what he has seen to work for other songwriters as well. And last but not least, another theme that kept coming up throughout this interview was this idea of speed and being prepared and really sharpening your skill set so that you can act quickly. And he talked about that as far as like songwriting. I think he mentioned like, writing songs and having them written and recorded and out the door in a few hours. Like that takes some skills to get to be that fast. But when you are a fast writer, that opens up more opportunities, right? But also the way he talked about understanding the engineering side of things too. I think that's also important because as a songwriter who wants to work fast, being able to engineer your own music and do it at a high quality level, I think is really important as well. Because then, yeah, you're not waiting for other studios to have their availability open or another engineer, or even having your music in the hands of someone else who may not even share your vision for it too. So yeah, I think being an engineer, really focusing on that craft, getting those skills down, optimizing your workflows, your process, understanding your tools, what you're listening for, knowing how to properly set up your instruments and your microphones and all that kind of stuff to get the right sounds. All of that stuff is critical if you want to be able to work fast. So that's that part of it there. And then obviously being a songwriter, practicing enough to the point where you know how to write songs quickly. You know how to act on things that inspire you for lyrical ideas, stuff like that. It takes some practice, it takes some time, but it's definitely possible to learn and to get stronger at. But a lot of this has to do with just studying the processes that people have and applying that to your own workflow and getting the experience with it as well. So yeah, if you want to get into this stuff, I would definitely recommend that you really work on sharpening your skills so that you can act fast and take advantage of these opportunities as they come, or create opportunities for yourself too. Now, if that sounds helpful to you, that's exactly what I work on with my students inside of my Amplitude coaching program. And in that program, I'm working one-on-one with my students to help them make their vision come to life, help them go through that entire recording, editing, mixing, production process so that you know how to get those sounds that you hear in your head to come out of your speakers. And you know what steps to take, what to be listening for, how to use those tools, ultimately have that confidence that you can work fast and build your systems and your templates that allow you to get stuff done extremely fast. So if you are interested in learning more about that program, make sure to check out MasterYourMix.com/amplitude. On that page, there's a link where you can book a free call with me, where I'd love to learn more about your music, what you're working on, what your current process looks like, where you're feeling stuck, and see if I can help you, if I can give you some direction in terms of where you should be focusing your energy on to see the fastest improvement. And if it seems like I can help you in that and we can work together, I'd love to talk about that. But if not, no worries. It's a no pressure call. It's just really about getting some clarity on how to help you move forward with your music and get the results that you're looking for. So once again, make sure to check out MasterYourMix.com/amplitude for all the details on that. And with that said, we're at the end of this episode. Thank you so much for sticking around, and I can't wait to chat with you in the next one. We'll talk soon. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. Please make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app and leave a review. If you have any questions or comments for the podcast, send an email to questions@masteryourmix.com. And for more information on how to create pro recordings from your home studio, visit masteryourmix.com.